Hi everyone. In the last video we learned about the demand for foreign exchange and supply of foreign exchange. Now demand for foreign exchange is inversely related to the price of the foreign exchange and supply of foreign exchange is directly related to the price of foreign exchange. So demand and price of foreign exchange are inversely related, supply and price are positively or directly related. And then we learned about the equilibrium rate of exchange. Now equilibrium rate of exchange is the rate at which the exchange rate is determined by the forces of demand and supply. It is the rate at which the forces of demand and supply intersect. Where the forces of demand and supply intersect each other, there the equilibrium rate of exchange is determined. Now today we are going to learn about appreciation and depreciation of currency. To know about the appreciation and depreciation of currency, we have to get an idea about, we should know about the demand and supply of foreign exchange. So recollect all the topics that you have learned in the last few classes regarding demand and supply of foreign exchange. Now the equilibrium rate of exchange, as I told you, it is determined at a point where demand for foreign exchange intersect the supply of foreign exchange. Now this is the diagram, the simple diagram which I can draw, which I have drawn for you to recollect. The equilibrium rate of exchange is determined at a point where the demand curve is intersecting the supply curve. Demand curve for foreign exchange is intersecting the supply of foreign exchange. This is the equilibrium point. From that, if you draw a line to the y-axis, you can find the equilibrium rate of exchange, the price of exchange. So equilibrium rate of exchange is the rate of exchange which is determined by the intersection of demand curve and supply curve. Now this equilibrium position of E can be disturbed. It can change whenever there is a change in the demand and supply. That is the topic which we are going to learn today. Now I can read the sentence for you. The equilibrium rate of exchange will be disturbed. I mean, this particular E can change when there is any change in the demand and supply. I have written supply 2 times. And supply of foreign exchange. So equilibrium rate of exchange can be disturbed if there is any change in the demand and supply of foreign exchange. Whenever this demand and supply changes, this equilibrium position also changes. Now let us see what is this change in demand and change in supply. Now at this point, I want you all to recollect what all things you have learned with regard to the concepts of demand and supply in class 11. Change in demand and change in supply. What is a change in the demand? Change in the demand can either be increase or decrease. That is what I have written. Change in the demand can be increase or decrease. Increase or decrease. Now if it is an increase in the demand, how will you represent it in the demand curve? Rightward shift, as you all know. If it is a decrease in the demand, how will you represent? Leftward shift, as you all know. So that is what I have written here. Change in the demand can be increase or decrease in the demand, which can cause rightward and leftward shift. So increase means rightward shift, decrease means leftward shift of the demand curve of foreign exchange. Similarly, change in supply also. Change in the supply can be increase or decrease in the supply. Likewise, a change in the demand, change in the supply can also be increase or decrease in the supply. If it is an increase in the supply, it will be represented by the rightward shift of the supply curve, and if it is a decrease in the supply, it will be represented by the leftward shift of the supply curve. That is what is written here, which can cause a rightward and leftward shift of the supply curve. Once again I will read. Change in the supply can increase or decrease in the supply. If it is increase, there will be rightward shift of the supply curve. If it is a decrease, there will be leftward shift of the supply curve. If it is an increase, rightward shift of the supply curve. If it is a decrease, leftward shift of the supply curve. You know how to draw the rightward shift and leftward shift. So, with all these points, by keeping all these points in your mind, we are going to explain the concept of appreciation and depreciation. I told you appreciation and depreciation of currency can happen whenever there is a change in the demand and change in the supply. Therefore, the rightward and leftward shift of the demand curve, rightward and leftward shift of the supply curve, these are the concepts which we are going to use here simultaneously. Now, change in the demand, increase and decrease in the demand. Now, let us first start the concept of explaining the appreciation and depreciation of currency with change in the demand. When there is a change in the demand, how appreciation and depreciation of currency takes place. Now, for that, we can draw a diagram where x-axis and y-axis is given. Now, on the x-axis we will mark demand and supply of foreign exchange, and on the y-axis we represent the rate of exchange. Now, the demand curve and supply curve can be drawn. The point where the demand and supply curve intersect is known as the equilibrium point. There we are drawing the rate of exchange and the quantity of demand and supply of foreign exchange. So, this is the equilibrium rate of exchange, and I told you this equilibrium rate can be disturbed or changed whenever there is an increase in the demand or decrease in the demand, and this increase in the demand and decrease in the demand is the one which causes appreciation and depreciation of currency. Now, let us first start with increase in the demand. Now, how will you represent the increase in the demand? As I told you, increase in the demand can be represented by the rightward shift of the demand curve. The new demand curve is D1, D1. Now, you can see the equilibrium point, which is the initial equilibrium point, is now getting disturbed. It has now changed to the new equilibrium point, and you can see that supply curve is remaining to be constant here. We are not changing the supply. The only change is happening with the demand curve. We have to draw both the supply curve and the demand curve because this is the rate of exchange which is determined by the forces of demand and supply. Therefore, we have to represent both demand curve and the supply curve in the diagram. So, but remember one thing, change in the demand means supply curve should remain constant. That is why supply curve is remaining to be constant. So, with the increase in the demand or rightward shift of the demand curve, you can find the new equilibrium point here as E1. With that new equilibrium point, you can find the new rate of exchange as R1. So, new equilibrium point R1 and the new quantity OQ1 is the new quantity of the foreign exchange, and the rate of exchange is OR1. Here you need to concentrate only on this rate of exchange, what it happens. To make you understand, you need to concentrate more on rate of exchange. Now, let us assume this rate of exchange as $1 is equal to 67 rupees. Now, let us assume this R1 as $1 is equal to 68 rupees. What did you find here now? As we learned yesterday when I explained the managed floating, the same concept was explained, the same diagram was also drawn in the previous video. Okay. Now, see, when the rate of exchange is OR1, it means what? What is the value of the Indian currency in terms of dollar? $1 is equal to rupees 68. So, what has happened here? In order to get something from USA, we need to give more outside. Earlier, we need to give only 67 rupees for $1, but now we need to give 68 rupees. So more money has to flow outside. So in this case we can say that our currency, our domestic currency has depreciated. Why it is depreciated? Why it is depreciated? Because in order to get something from USA, we need to give more for them. Instead of 67, more is flowing out from us. So if there is increase in the demand, the rate of exchange will increase and it will cause for depreciation of Indian currency. So due to increase in the demand, domestic currency has depreciated. Now let us see what happens if the demand curve shift to the left. That means when there is a decrease in the demand, that can be represented by the leftward shift to D2. Okay, now you can find the new equilibrium point where the demand curve is intersecting the existing supply curve as E2. The quantity is also Q2. Now this particular rate of exchange is R2. Now you can just imagine this R2. Anyway, it has come down from R. Therefore, we can give the value of R2 as 66. What did you find here? The rate of exchange has come down. That means previously we had to give 67 when we buy something from USA. But now we need to give only rupees 66 for $1 when we are getting something from USA. That means our currency has appreciated and their currency has depreciated. So when there is a decrease in the demand, what will happen? When there is a decrease in the demand, causes appreciation of Indian currency. So this is the conclusion. So increase in the demand with the rightward shift of the demand curve, rate of exchange has increased. So what happens? When the increase in the demand has happened, our domestic currency has depreciated. We have to give more money to get something from USA. Now with the decrease in the demand, what is happening? Appreciation of domestic currency. So when we speak about appreciation and depreciation of Indian currency, we have to think about what is happening to their currency also. For example, increase in the demand, our domestic currency has depreciated. That means US dollar has appreciated. With a decrease in the demand, Indian currency has appreciated. That means US dollar has depreciated. Just opposite happens for them. So this is the appreciation and depreciation which has happened due to the change in the demand. Now likewise change in the supply. So for that we need to draw the diagram where x-axis and y-axis is represented. Demand and supply of foreign exchange. I told you what is the significance of representing both demand and supply in the diagram, because rate of exchange is determined by the market forces of demand and supply. So you can look at here where supply curve is drawn upward sloping and demand curve. This is the equilibrium rate of exchange OR. Now here demand curve will remain to be constant and supply curve is going to change. So increase in the supply will be represented by the rightward shift of the supply curve. So if it is a rightward shift of the supply curve, what will happen? You can find exchange rate has come down to R1. So with the new supply curve has shifted to the right. The new supply curve is S1, S1. The old supply curve is SS. The new supply curve is S1, S1. There the equilibrium rate of exchange is E1. Equilibrium rate of exchange. Equilibrium point is E1 and equilibrium rate of exchange is OR1. That means it has come down. There is excess supply of the foreign exchange. When there is excess supply of something, we can find the rate of exchange will come down, as I mentioned earlier. So you can give the value of this as 67, this rate of exchange as 66. So the value has come down. Then what happens when the supply curve when there is a leftward shift of the supply curve? When there is a leftward shift of the supply curve, the new equilibrium point is E2. When we draw this rate of exchange will become as R2 and the quantity is OQ2. Here the rate of exchange has increased to 68. So when there is a rightward shift of the supply curve, when there is an increase in the supply, what is happening here? When there is an increase in the supply, new equilibrium point is E1 and the rate of exchange has come down. That means previously we had to give rupees 67 for $1 worth of good, but now we are getting $1 worth of good by paying only 66. That means we are getting the things in a lesser cost. That means Indian currency has appreciated. So what is happening to their currency? US dollar has depreciated. Now with the decrease in the supply, what is happening? With the decrease in the supply, rate of exchange is, that is leftward shift of the supply curve. The new supply curve is S2, S2. Decrease in the supply is always represented as the leftward shift. So S2, S2 is the new supply curve and the equilibrium point is E2 where the rate of exchange has increased. There is less supply. So definitely the rate of exchange will increase. That means now the goods are available from USA only at an amount of $1 is equal to 68 rupees. Therefore, Indian currency has depreciated. Indian currency has depreciated. If Indian currency has depreciated, what you should understand, US dollar has appreciated. So this is about the appreciation and depreciation of currency which has caused due to the change in the demand and supply. Now, next we will move on to the advantages of depreciation. Now you know the depreciation has happened due to the changes in the forces of demand and supply. Now let us see what are the advantages of depreciation. Now depreciation means what? Once again I will remind you, value of the currency going up from 67 to 68. Previously it was $1 is equal to 67, but now $1 is equal to 68. That means our currency has depreciated. Our currency has depreciated. Now when the currency has depreciated, what are the benefits out of that? That means now the value of $1 is equal to 68 instead of 67. It can encourage the export. That means if you are encouraging the export, what will happen? Instead of 67 for our export, we are getting rupees 68 for the US dollars. So we will always encourage the export because we are getting more money. But definitely we will discourage the import. Why? Because earlier goods were imported to India for $1 is equal to 67 rupees. But now it is $1 is equal to 68. Therefore, import is not at all profitable for us. We have to pay more for them. So as a result, what can happen? So many problems can happen in the balance of payment. Therefore, we will always discourage the import during the situation. Now, by discouraging the import, we can prevent the trade deficit and current account deficit. You all have learned what is trade deficit and current account deficit, where we include visible, invisible items, all those things. So, by preventing the import, we can also, by discouraging the import, we can also reduce the deficit in the trade balance as well as in the current account. Then we promote foreign tourism. We will encourage the people from outside so that we will earn more foreign exchange. Then it strengthens the balance of payment, because as we are getting more for the exports, it will strengthen our balance of payment. Now we will move on to the disadvantages of depreciation. Again, I am reminding, depreciation means the value of our currency going up from 67 to 68 for $1. It encourages the exports, definitely it encourages the export. That means we are getting more money now. So as it encourages the export, what will happen? More money is flowing into our country. We get more foreign exchange. So what will happen? We will convert it into Indian currency. So what happened? Through its conversion, the money supply of our country increases. When money supply increases, what is the major problem that we face in our country? Inflation. Inflation is a major problem that we face. That means aggregate demand is increased. This kind of inflation where aggregate demand is increased is known as demand pull inflation. What is the term called? Demand pull inflation. So increase in the export is a very good thing, but to some extent it can cause for increase in the money supply as there is more flow of foreign exchange. Therefore, as a result, what will happen? Aggregate demand will increase, inflation increases, there is demand pull inflation. Now, the imports which are necessities will become more costlier now. We are discouraging the import, but for some extent, some goods are more necessary for us. Therefore, that cannot be avoided. Those necessities will become more costlier. Therefore, it can create cost push inflation. Then the last one, it can increase the burden of the government with external debt due to high import cost. I told you there are certain imports which are unavoidable. Therefore, government has to definitely buy that. Therefore, it can create huge burden for the government. Now, we will move on to the last topic of this chapter, devaluation and depreciation. Now, whenever you learn about depreciation, you need to understand something with regard to devaluation. Now, you very well know what is depreciation. Depreciation is something which happens, it is a change that can happen for the rate of exchange, isn't it? Due to the change in the forces of demand and supply, just we have learned. But devaluation is thus a change in the rate of exchange which is fixed by the government. So, it can be related to fixed exchange rate system. In the beginning of the chapter, I told you what is a fixed exchange rate system. It is a rate of exchange which is determined by the government. Therefore, when the government is fixing the exchange rate can vary according to the decision of the government. So, such variation that can happen in the exchange rate due to the fixation of the government is known as devaluation. Okay, so the price or the prices of the domestic currency can come down. It is consciously done by the government for certain purposes. So, when the price of the domestic currency comes down due to the conscious effort of the government, we can call it as devaluation. But depreciation is not happening due to the conscious effort of the government. There the role of the government is completely absent. It is due to the forces of demand and supply. So, if the price of the domestic currency is reducing due to the effort of the government, it is known as devaluation. If it is due to the forces of demand and supply, it is known as depreciation. Now, let us see the difference on the basis. There are three columns. On the basis of meaning, how will you differentiate devaluation and depreciation? Devaluation refers to reduction in the price of domestic currency in terms of foreign currency under fixed exchange rate system. You know, the government is determining the rate of exchange. Therefore, this devaluation happens in fixed exchange rate system. But whereas depreciation is happening due to the forces of demand and supply, therefore, it takes place only in a flexible exchange rate system. Next one is occurrence. Now, devaluation, it is due to the interference of government. Government is fixing. Sometimes government will consciously fix the rate of exchange lesser for favorable situation of our country. Therefore, this Devaluation is especially due to the government, but whereas depreciation happens due to change in the demand and supply, increase and decrease in the demand and supply, just as I have explained to you now. Next one is devaluation happens in a fixed exchange rate system, but whereas depreciation occurs in a flexible exchange rate system. That's all for today, children. Thus we have come to an end of this chapter, balance of payment and foreign exchange. Thank you.